It started with a bark. Not just any bark, the kind that slices through a quiet afternoon like a siren. Officer Carter had heard his canine partner bark hundreds of times in their 3 years together, but never like this. This wasn't alert. This wasn't defense. This was desperation. Urgency. Something was wrong, and it was coming from a locked, sun-scorched SUV parked by the curb. People walked past it, oblivious, but the dog knew. And within 10 minutes, they would all realize he wasn't just barking at a car. He was barking at death itself. The day had been nothing out of the ordinary, until it was. Officer Luke Carter had just wrapped up his shift, wiping sweat off his neck as he unhooked Ranger from the patrol SUV for a quick stretch. Portland, Oregon wasn't exactly the desert, but this early July afternoon felt close to it. High 90s, no breeze, and the kind of heat that shimmered above the blacktop like a mirage. Ranger, his 4-year-old German Shepherd partner, usually stayed close on leash, sniffing bushes and wagging his tail with practiced ease. But that day, something flipped in him. He stopped walking, ears perked, nose up. Then he pulled, hard. "Whoa, hey, Ranger, heel!" But Ranger wasn't listening. He lunged forward toward a line of parked cars outside the public library's side lot, his paws scraping the sidewalk, nose in the air, barking like a siren. It was the kind of bark that made people turn their heads. "Ranger, sit!" Nothing. The dog kept going, eyes locked on one particular black SUV parked under the direct sun. All the windows were up. The engine was off. People started watching. One mom, holding her toddler, crossed the street. A man on a scooter slowed down. Carter followed the leash, his hand hovering near his holster, still trying to understand what was setting his canine off. "What is it, boy?" Carter muttered, kneeling beside him. Ranger scratched the back passenger door frantically, then circled and let out a deep, guttural growl that chilled Carter despite the heat. The SUV was an older model Ford Explorer. Tinted windows, tags up to date. Nothing illegal that he could see. But something wasn't right. He pressed his palm against the glass. It was scorching. And then, out of the corner of his eye, Carter saw it. A small hand, barely visible, just a flash, between the cracks of a piled-up blanket in the back seat. His heart dropped. Officer Carter yanked out his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 142. Possible child inside a locked vehicle. Need EMS and permission to breach. Corner of 9th and Wilcox, library parking lot. Temps pushing 97. Repeat, possible heat emergency." "Copy that, 142. EMS en route. Permission granted to enter vehicle if emergency is confirmed." Emergency was beyond confirmed. He ran back to the SUV, tried the door handles, all locked. He tapped the glass harder. "Hey, kiddo, can you hear me?" No movement. Inside, it looked like a pile of toys, blankets, and juice boxes had been thrown together, maybe for a long day out. But there, buried among the clutter, was a boy, no more than 3 or 4 years old, face flushed red, a sweat running down his cheek. His eyes were closed. The dog was right. Without hesitating, Carter grabbed the small metal punch from his vest and shattered the back window. Glass exploded, the thick smell of heat and plastic rushing out like a released oven. He reached in carefully, avoiding shards, and popped the lock. The door opened with a reluctant click. Ranger stepped back but didn't stop barking until Carter leaned in and gently lifted the boy from the seat. His small body was limp, still breathing, but barely. If you've made it this far, you already know this is more than just a dog story. It's about instincts, seconds that count, and what happens when a silent hero barks loud enough to save a life. If you care about stories like these, please consider subscribing to Heroes for Animals, where we share the moments that matter. The ones where animals don't just love us, they save us. Carter laid the boy on the sidewalk in the shade, checking his pulse. Shallow. He ripped open a bottle of water, pouring it into his hand, and patting it gently on the child's forehead and arms. "Stay with me, buddy. You're okay. You're okay. Now, a crowd had formed. Someone said, "Is he breathing?" "Yeah," Carter answered, "Gee, but not for long if we hadn't found him." Ranger lay down beside the boy, tail still twitching. His usual playful energy had vanished, replaced by a heavy focus. He let out a soft, whining sound and gently nudged the boy's foot with his nose. That's when the boy stirred. "Just a little," a whisper. "Mommy." Carter swallowed the knot in his throat. "We're gonna get you to your mom, all right? Just hang in there." Sirens blared down the street as EMS finally arrived. The paramedics took over, wrapping the boy in cool packs, slipping a small oxygen mask over his nose. Carter stood back, heart still pounding. One paramedic turned to him. "Another 5 minutes, and this would have been a fatality." The words landed like a punch. He looked at Ranger. The dog stared back, tongue out, eyes calm again. He had known. It wasn't until later that Carter learned the full story. That would come in time. The mother, the lies, the forgotten pickup. But at this moment, all he knew was that a child had lived because a dog wouldn't stop barking. And he realized something else, too, that sometimes the biggest heroes walk on 4 legs, and they never, ever leave the ones who need them most. The ambulance's back doors swung shut with a metallic slam, and the vehicle sped off, sirens wailing down the avenue. Officer Luke Carter stood frozen beside his canine partner, sweat dripping from his brow, heart still pounding from what had just unfolded. Around him, the crowd began to disperse, the bystanders murmuring versions of the same thought. "That little boy almost died right in front of us." Right in. Ranger stood beside him, panting from the heat, his eyes tracking the ambulance as it disappeared. Carter glanced down and gave his partner a firm pat on the side. "You did good, buddy. Real good." But something still gnawed at him. There were too many unanswered questions. Why was the boy locked in the car? Where was his parent or guardian? And how long had he been trapped inside? He looked over at the black SUV, now surrounded by shattered glass and taped off with police cordon. The scene was being processed, and forensics had already begun taking photographs. The car had been parked in direct sunlight, with no sign of the engine running or the AC on. No sunshade, no note, no cracked windows worth mentioning. Just a child and silence. Carter replayed the moment he first saw the small hand through the glass. The way the boy's skin had flushed that angry red. The stillness. The total, terrifying stillness. He couldn't shake the image, and he couldn't let it go without answers. An hour later, back at the precinct, Carter paced near his desk, sipping a lukewarm coffee. Ranger rested on the cool tile floor beside his chair, eyes half closed, but still alert. Officer Hannah Briggs, his desk mate and longtime colleague, walked in holding a file. "You're not going to believe this," she said, dropping the file on his desk. "We just got an ID on the boy." Carter leaned in. "Already? That was fast." Turns out the mother filed a missing child report about 2 hours ago. Her name's Tasha Monroe, lives 5 miles east of here. She called 911, full panic when she got home and realized her 4-year-old son Eli wasn't with her. Carter raised an eyebrow. "Wait, she didn't know he was missing until she got home?" Briggs nodded slowly. "She picked up her other son from summer camp. Says she thought Eli was at daycare. When she called the daycare to ask, they said Eli wasn't there, never showed up." Carter's jaw tightened. "So how did he end up in the car?" "That's where it gets weird." Briggs flipped the page. "The SUV is registered to a woman named Tamara Ellis, works at a local private daycare. And yes, she's one of the people responsible for Eli." Carter didn't say anything for a moment. Then he whispered, "She left him there." "Looks like it." Surveillance footage shows Tamara arriving at the library parking lot just after 1 p.m., walking in alone. No sign she ever opened the back doors. No indication she looked behind her. And what time did we pull him out? 3:18 p.m. 2 hours and change in 97-degree heat. Inside a car that had likely climbed past 120. How is he? Carter asked, swallowing hard. Stable. In pediatric ICU. Docs say he's lucky, very lucky. Thanks to a dog. Briggs gave Ranger a soft smile. That dog deserves a steak dinner. The following morning, Carter stood in the hospital hallway, dressed in plain clothes. He wasn't officially assigned to the case anymore, but he needed to see the kid. Needed to see that he was okay with his own eyes. A nurse led him into a dim room. Eli lay in a hospital bed under soft blankets, an IV in one arm, and cartoon characters dancing silently on a mounted screen. Tasha Monroe sat in the corner chair, eyes red and puffy. She looked up as Carter stepped in. "You're the officer?" she asked quietly. "I am. I'm Luke Carter, and this is Ranger." He motioned to the dog standing calmly beside him. Tasha got up slowly, looking down at the dog with a mixture of wonder and pain. He found my baby?" Carter nodded. "He wouldn't stop barking until I listened." Tasha broke down then, covering her mouth with both hands. Her knees buckled slightly, and she dropped to a crouch in front of Ranger, stroking his head as she cried. "I thought I lost him," she whispered. "You almost did," Carter replied gently. "But he's a fighter. And your son? He's a survivor." Eli stirred in his bed and opened his eyes. "Doggy," he mumbled. Ranger's ears perked up. Carter smiled. "Yeah, buddy, he's here." The nurse leaned in. "That's the first time he's spoken since yesterday." Carter blinked, letting that sink in. The next wave came swiftly. The local news caught wind of the story after the hospital released a statement about a 4-year-old boy rescued from a hot car by a canine officer. Soon, reporters were calling the precinct. Carter received 5 interview requests before lunch. At first, he declined them all. He didn't do this job for attention. But when his captain sat him down and said, "This is bigger than you. It's a public message about vigilance, about what can happen," he reconsidered. A day later, he sat under bright studio lights across from a local news anchor, with Ranger calmly resting at his feet. "Officer Carter, you've worked with Ranger for how long?" the anchor asked. 3 years, he said, "and he's never once failed me." "Did you know something was wrong the moment he started barking?" "I didn't, but he did. And that's all that mattered." Tamara Ellis was arrested the following week on charges of reckless endangerment, child neglect, and obstruction. According to investigators, she had taken a personal call just before leaving the daycare with Eli in the back seat. Distracted, she'd driven to the library to return books and pick up a form, completely forgetting the boy was in the car. She admitted to seeing news reports later that day and panicking. Rather than come forward, she pretended she had no idea where Eli had gone. The city's outrage was swift. Parents demanded accountability. The daycare's license was suspended pending investigation. But Carter couldn't stop thinking about how close it had all come to tragedy, and how no one, not even himself, had seen the danger, except Ranger. The following Saturday, Carter took Ranger for a walk downtown, hoping for some quiet. They passed a farmer's market, a row of food trucks, and ended up near a local park. "Hey! That's the dog from the news!" someone shouted. A young boy, maybe 8, ran up with a wide smile. "Can I pet him?" Carter nodded. "Sure, just go slow." The boy leaned in, scratching behind Ranger's ears. "You're a hero." Carter looked down at his partner. "Yeah," he said, "he really is." The newspaper headlines read like something out of a summer thriller. K9, hero saves boy from locked SUV in 97-degree heat. German Shepherd's bark leads to rescue of 4-year-old left behind. Mom thought he was at daycare. He wasn't. For Officer Luke Carter, the days following the rescue of little Eli Monroe had been surreal. People waved at him when he walked into diners. Strangers handed him coffee on the house. And everyone, absolutely everyone, wanted to meet Ranger. The dog, of course, didn't care for the attention. He cared about walks, his chew toy, and the occasional treat. But what he had done that afternoon was nothing short of life-saving, and Carter knew it. Still, beneath the public praise, something was eating at Luke. The guilt, because even though the system had worked, Ranger had barked, Carter had acted. What if they'd been 10 minutes later? What if Ranger had hesitated? What if Carter had dismissed his barking, thinking it was nothing? Those were the kinds of thoughts that crept in around 2 a.m., when the house was quiet and the heat still lingered in the walls. 3 days after the incident, Carter got a call from Tasha Monroe, Eli's mother. "I'd like to see you," she said. Her voice was stronger now, steady. "Of course. How's Eli doing?" "He's good. Getting his energy back. The doctors say he's recovering faster than expected." Carter smiled. "That's great to hear. But there's something I want to show you, something I need to give you." And him. They agreed to meet the next morning at a quiet corner of Irving Park, near the shaded picnic tables under the old elm trees. When Carter arrived, Ranger trotted at his side like always. Eli was sitting on a bench with a juice box in hand and a wide-brimmed Spider-Man hat on his head. Tasha was beside him, holding a small gift bag. Eli saw the dog and stood up immediately. "Doggy!" he yelled. Ranger perked up and wagged his tail. Tasha smiled. "He hasn't stopped talking about Ranger since he woke up in the hospital. We got him a little plush toy that looks like a German shepherd, and he carries it everywhere." Luke knelt down beside the boy. "Hey, Eli, how are you feeling, champ?" "I'm not hot anymore," the boy answered. "Good," Carter said, heart aching just a bit at the answer. Tasha handed Luke the gift bag. Inside was a custom leather collar tag, engraved on both sides. One side read, "Ranger, Guardian of Eli Monroe." The other side read, "For the bark that saved a life." Carter blinked. He looked up at her. This means a lot." "You saved my boy," she said softly. "But more than that, you listened to your dog. And because of that, I still get to tuck my son in every night. That tag is just a small way of saying thank you." Luke glanced at Ranger. "He's never let me down, never once." Later that week, Carter was called into the DA's office to discuss Tamara Ellis's charges. Sitting across the table from two prosecutors, he laid out everything he knew. "She left the boy in the car," Carter said. "Surveillance footage shows her walking away without checking. No effort, no excuse. Her lawyers saying she was distracted, that it was a tragic mistake. A mistake that almost killed a 4-year-old, Carter shot back. And then she lied. She didn't call for help when she saw the news. She didn't check the car. She went home and said nothing." The prosecutor nodded grimly. "We're pushing for felony neglect and reckless endangerment. The public needs to know we take this seriously, especially now, with these heat waves." Carter stood up. "I don't care if it was a mistake. That boy was cooking in there, minutes away from dying. If Ranger hadn't barked." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The backlash against the daycare center came quickly. Parents pulled their kids out in droves. The center issued a public apology, but it wasn't enough. State officials suspended their license pending further investigation. Tamara Ellis posted bail, but disappeared from the public eye. Her face had been plastered across news channels and social media for days. And while the media began to lose interest, Carter didn't. He found himself rewatching the body cam footage from that day over and over. Ranger barking, the window smash, the still form in the back seat. Every time he watched, his breath caught in his throat. It was like reliving a nightmare with a different ending each time. 1 week after the incident, Carter was invited to speak at a community safety event. Normally, he would have passed, but the organizers asked if Ranger could be there, and Carter couldn't say no. The gymnasium was packed. Parents, kids, volunteers, news reporters. A table was set up for Carter to answer questions about K-9 work, and Ranger? Well, he was the star of the show. Kids lined up to pet him, and parents asked about heat stroke prevention. When it was Carter's turn to speak, he stepped up to the microphone, holding a small water bottle and a dog leash. "I'm not here to talk about law enforcement today," he began. "I'm here to talk about instincts and listening when something doesn't feel right." He looked over at Ranger, who sat calmly at the edge of the stage. Ranger's bark wasn't loud to most people, but to me, it meant everything. He knew something I didn't, and because of that bark, a little boy named Eli is still alive. He paused, looking out at the room. "So this summer, please, if you see a car with a child or pet inside, don't just assume someone's coming. Call it in. Ask questions. Speak up. And most of all, listen to your instincts, just like Ranger did." The room burst into applause, but Carter's eyes found a quiet figure near the back, Tasha Monroe, holding Eli on her hip. That moment hit harder than anything. On the drive home, Carter looked at Ranger through the rearview mirror. "You changed someone's world, you know that?" he said. Ranger didn't respond, of course, but his tail thumped once against the seat. And that was answer enough. In the quiet of his home that night, Carter opened his desk drawer and placed the engraved tag beside his badge. He stared at both side by side. One symbolized his duty, the other, his partner's heart. And together, they told a story that no one in their town would ever forget. Officer Luke Carter never thought he'd lose sleep over a case that didn't even involve a crime scene with blood or a suspect on the run. But the rescue of little Eli Monroe wasn't fading from his mind. It was intensifying, even after the town began to move on. Even after the local paper shifted its headlines to upcoming parades and high school football, Carter couldn't stop thinking about everything that nearly went wrong. And one question in particular haunted him. Why wasn't this caught sooner? A week after the community safety event, Carter sat down in the precinct conference room across from Detective Carla Morales, who had recently taken over the deeper investigation into the daycare center. She was sharp, methodical, and not one to buy into surface-level apologies. "I'm glad you asked to meet," Morales said, flipping open a laptop, "because I've been looking deeper into Tamara Ellis's record, and something's not adding up." Carter leaned in. "What do you have?" "She's been written up 3 times in the last 2 years for improper supervision. Once involving a child wandering off the playground unnoticed. Another time leaving a door unlocked during nap time." "How is she still working with kids?" Carter muttered. "Technically, none of the reports reached the licensing board. The daycare handled them internally, which, if you ask me, smells like a cover-up." Carter clenched his jaw. This wasn't just a one-off mistake. It was building. Morales nodded. "Exactly. And I pulled something else. 2 years ago, a parent filed a formal complaint claiming their child was left in a van for several minutes after a field trip. Nothing came of it. No one could prove it. But that means it's not the first time she's done this. No, it's the first time she got caught." Back at home, Carter sat on his porch with Ranger at his feet. It was a warm evening, but not suffocating like that day in the parking lot. He watched the neighborhood kids ride bikes, their laughter echoing down the block. He thought about Eli. He thought about how close that boy had come to becoming another statistic. And for the first time since the rescue, Carter opened up his laptop and typed in a familiar search. Child heat stroke deaths in parked cars. The numbers were chilling. On average, 38 children die each year in the United States from vehicular heat stroke. Since 1998, over 900 deaths had been reported. And in more than half of those cases, the child had been forgotten by a caregiver. Carter sat back in his chair, disturbed. He closed the laptop and looked at Ranger. "You ever wonder why we remember the ones we save, but not the ones we lose?" Ranger looked up, head tilted. Carter smiled softly. "Yeah, me too." A few days later, Morales called with a bombshell. Tamara Ellis was offered a deal by her attorney, she said, but she rejected it. She's pleading not guilty and preparing to go to trial. Carter blinked. She's seriously going to fight this? Yeah. Claims she had a medical episode, says she was confused and disoriented. Her defense is pushing for sympathy. What about the surveillance video? They say she was mentally foggy, couldn't think straight. Her lawyer is preparing a neuropsych evaluation. Carter shook his head. Let me guess. They're going to turn this into an unforeseeable accident. Exactly. Later that week, Carter stopped by the Monroe household. Tasha opened the door, surprise flickering in her eyes. Officer Carter, everything okay? Yeah, he said with a small smile. I just wanted to check in. Mind if I come in? She stepped aside. Eli was sitting on the living room floor surrounded by stuffed animals. A new plush German shepherd was tucked under his arm. Hi, Ranger, Eli shouted. Ranger's tail wagged as he trotted over and licked the boy's face. Carter sat down on the couch and watched them for a moment. You've got a strong kid, he said. Tasha smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. I still wake up at night thinking I've lost him. Carter nodded. I believe you. She looked at him seriously. Do you think she's going to get away with it? He hesitated. I think her lawyers are going to try to make her look like a victim. But I don't think a jury will forget the facts. I just don't want another mom to go through what I did. Not ever. Carter leaned forward. Then maybe it's time you told your side. Publicly. Tasha blinked. You mean like a statement? I mean an interview. The news outlets are still paying attention. You could be the voice that makes people listen. Not for you, not even for Tamara, but for all the other parents who think it'll never happen to them. A few days later, Tasha Monroe sat in front of a news camera with a microphone clipped to her blouse. She held up a picture of Eli, smiling and covered in popsicle juice, and said softly, This is my son. He's alive because of a dog who wouldn't stop barking, and because one officer trusted that dog enough to act. She paused, voice steady. But this never should have happened. And if people think forgetting a child in a car is something that only happens to careless parents, they're wrong. It can happen to anyone who's distracted, stressed, or running late. But that doesn't mean we don't hold people accountable. We have to. Her message was clear, and it resonated. The public outcry renewed. Parents began requesting stricter laws on car seat sensors and daycare training. A petition circulated demanding that caregivers be required to use child checklists when transporting kids. Carter watched it all unfold from the sidelines. He wasn't the face of the story anymore, and that was exactly how he wanted it, because the people who needed to speak were finally speaking. Late one evening, Carter walked Ranger through the park. Fireflies blinked in the shadows, and a light breeze rustled the grass. They stopped near the same bench where Eli had first reunited with Ranger. Carter sat down, looking up at the night sky. You know, buddy, I used to think heroes wore badges, or uniforms, or capes. He looked down at Ranger, who rested his head on Carter's knee. But sometimes they just wear fur, and they bark loud enough to be heard over everything else. By late August, the buzz surrounding Eli Monroe's rescue had cooled in most circles. But inside the county courthouse, the temperature was rising. Tamara Ellis, the daycare worker who left Eli in the sweltering SUV, was finally headed to trial, and everyone had an opinion about it. Morning shows speculated on legal strategies. Radio hosts debated forgiveness versus justice. Parents posted on Facebook groups, calling for tougher state licensing standards. And Officer Luke Carter? He just wanted the truth to hold its ground. The courtroom was smaller than most people expected. Modest, almost plain. No TV drama lighting, no pounding gavels, just cold fluorescent bulbs, and a judge who looked like she hadn't smiled since the Clinton administration. Carter sat in the third row behind the prosecution table. He wasn't scheduled to testify until later in the week, but the DA had asked him to be present for opening arguments. Ranger, of course, wasn't allowed inside the courtroom, but the dog waited just outside, napping comfortably in the air-conditioned K9 cruiser, unaware he'd become the centerpiece of the state's case. The prosecution's opening statement was measured and sharp. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case isn't about a momentary lapse," the attorney began. "It's about a pattern of negligence that nearly cost a 4-year-old boy his life." On July 7th, in temperatures nearing 100 degrees, the defendant parked her SUV and walked away. She never looked back. She never checked her back seat. And for more than 2 hours, young Eli Monroe was left to bake inside that vehicle. Alone, helpless, forgotten. He survived because of a dog's instincts and an officer's quick action. But make no mistake, this was not an accident. It was criminal neglect. The defense's rebuttal was less aggressive, focused more on emotional confusion and extreme stress. "She's a mother herself," her attorney argued. "She had no history of abuse. That day was unusually hectic. She simply forgot. It was a human error, not a crime." Carter's hands clenched slightly in his lap. "I just forgot? That boy could have died." When it came time for Carter to testify, he walked to the stand in full uniform. He wasn't nervous. He'd testified in tougher cases, but this one felt personal. He glanced at the jury, a mix of suburban parents, 2 retirees, and a younger man who looked barely old enough to rent a car. He raised his right hand, swore in, and sat down. The prosecutor wasted no time. "Officer Carter, can you walk us through what happened on the afternoon of July 7th? He took a breath and began. "My shift had just ended. I took my K9 partner, Ranger, out for a stretch behind the station. As we walked past a line of parked cars, Ranger began barking and pulling toward one particular SUV. He wouldn't stop. That's not like him, unless there's something wrong." "And what did you observe when you approached the vehicle?" "The windows were fully up. No engine running. When I looked inside, I saw a child, Eli, laying in the back seat, visibly sweating, unmoving. I smashed the rear window and pulled him out." "And had you delayed another few minutes?" Carter's voice dipped. "The paramedics said he likely would have died." The courtroom was quiet, dead quiet. The defense asked only a few questions about procedure, about how sure Carter was that Tamara Ellis didn't return to check the car. He answered firmly. "She never came back," he said. "Not once. Not until after he was already in the hospital." Outside the courthouse, reporters waited like wolves. Carter had no interest in feeding them. He climbed into his cruiser where Ranger waited, tail thumping against the metal kennel. "You missed all the drama," he said, scratching behind the dog's ears. Ranger licked his hand in return. Meanwhile, the Monroe family tried to keep things as normal as possible. Eli was back at home, attending a part-time preschool his mother vetted thoroughly. Background checks, video access, daily updates. Tasha didn't take chances anymore. She barely let her son out of her sight. One afternoon, Carter stopped by to deliver a printed certificate of appreciation the department had created for Eli. It was silly, really, just a cartoon version of Ranger with a gold star, but the boy beamed when he saw it. "He saved me," Eli said, pointing to the dog. Carter knelt beside him. "He did, buddy, but you were strong too. You held on." Tasha put a hand on Carter's shoulder. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you think she regrets it?" "What happened, I mean?" Carter exhaled. "I don't know. I hope she does. But regret doesn't fix what happened. Responsibility does." Tasha nodded. "I guess I just want to understand how someone forgets a child." Carter didn't answer, because deep down, he didn't understand it either. When the verdict came, the courtroom was full again. The jury filed in, solemn and still. Carter sat beside Morales and the lead prosecutor, trying not to look toward the defense table. He focused instead on the Monroe family, sitting in the front row. The foreperson stood. In the matter of the state of Oregon versus Tamara Ellis, we find the defendant, guilty of felony child neglect and reckless endangerment. The room tensed. Some cried. Tamara sat motionless, blinking rapidly, as if the words hadn't yet landed. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. Maximum penalty, 5 years in state prison. Minimum, 1 year with probation and mandatory parenting and safety education courses. Outside, the reporters pounced again. But Carter slipped away quietly. He wasn't interested in sound bites. Instead, he drove straight to the small park where he and Ranger always ended their shifts. He unhooked the leash. "Go on, boy. You've earned it." Ranger bounded into the grass, nose down, tail up, chasing invisible squirrels and real butterflies. Carter leaned back against the bench and let the moment wash over him. In a world obsessed with viral moments, Carter knew this one would fade soon. Another crisis would take its place. Another news story. Another headline. But for him, and for a boy named Eli, this wasn't a news cycle. It was a lifetime. A second chance, carried on 4 legs, covered in fur, and built on instincts no human could understand, but that every decent person should honor. And as the sun dipped below the Oregon tree line, Carter whispered under his breath, not for an audience, but for himself and his partner, "You did good, Ranger. You did real good." 6 weeks had passed since the verdict, and while the courtroom echoes had quieted, the ripples of what had happened that July afternoon still ran through every corner of the community. In Portland and its surrounding suburbs, parents were checking their back seats twice. Daycares implemented stricter protocols. A new bill, Eli's Law, was being drafted in the Oregon State Legislature, requiring all licensed childcare providers to complete annual heat stroke prevention training. Officer Luke Carter hadn't expected any of this. He certainly didn't expect to become the quiet face of a local movement, or for his canine partner, Ranger, to appear on a mural outside the city animal shelter. He had joined the force to serve, protect, and stay out of the spotlight. But that's the thing about real heroes. They never choose the stage. It finds them. On a crisp September morning, Carter pulled up to Portland Elementary School. A line of kids was filing into the building, laughing, backpacks bouncing. At the front entrance stood Principal Davis, waving in students and motioning toward the visitors' table set up near the main office. Carter clipped Ranger's leash and stepped out of the cruiser. "You ready for this?" he asked. Ranger responded by sneezing and wagging his tail. Inside, a second-grade class had gathered on a carpet. Eli Monroe was seated front and center, holding his plush Ranger toy like it was a trophy. Carter took a seat and began. "Hi, everyone. I'm Officer Carter, and this is Ranger. He's not just my partner, he's also a lifesaver." The room lit up with whispers and awed expressions. He shared the story, not every graphic detail, but enough that the kids understood. Enough that they knew why listening, paying attention, and speaking up could save a life. And enough that they saw the quiet power of the dog who now sat proudly, eyes soft, tail still. When it was over, one little girl raised her hand. "Can dogs feel when someone's in trouble?" Carter smiled. "Sometimes, I think they just know what we don't." Outside the school, Tasha Monroe waited under a maple tree. She hadn't asked for the visit, but when the principal invited Carter to speak, she made sure to be there. She approached slowly, hands clasped. "Thank you," she said. Carter nodded. "You doing okay?" "Yeah, we're healing every day." Eli's had no lasting effects, physically at least. Emotionally, I think he's stronger than I am. "You're both stronger than you think." She pulled a folded piece of paper from her bag. "I wrote a letter to Tamara Ellis. I'm not sending it, but I needed to say the things I'll never get to say in court." Carter took the letter and glanced at the first line. "You stole my breath, but you didn't take my son." It was raw, honest, and painfully brave. "If you ever decide to speak about it publicly, I'll stand with you," Carter said. Tasha smiled. "Thanks. But for now, I'm just going to enjoy being his mom." Back at the station, Carter placed a new framed photo on his desk. It was from the school visit. Eli, surrounded by classmates, all petting Ranger. The joy was contagious. It looked like any other group of kids at any other elementary school. But Carter knew the weight behind that image, knew how close it had come to being a very different picture. Captain Harris walked by and paused. "You ever think about writing a book?" she asked. Carter raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "About that dog," she said, pointing to Ranger, who was snoring under the desk. "And about how sometimes the smallest choices save the biggest lives." He chuckled. "You think anyone would read it?" "I think you'd be surprised." Carter looked down at his partner. "He'd probably insist on royalties." A few weeks later, the Monroe family hosted a small backyard barbecue. It wasn't anything fancy, just neighbors, hot dogs on the grill, paper plates with baked beans and potato salad. But there was music, laughter, and the kind of easy peace that only comes when you've been through something hard and come out the other side. Carter showed up late, in plain clothes, Ranger trotting beside him with a tennis ball in his mouth. Eli spotted them first. "Ranger's here!" he shouted, running full speed into the dog's legs. Ranger dropped the ball, tail wagging furiously. The backyard came to a hush as Carter stepped forward, a wrapped box in hand. He handed it to Eli. The boy ripped it open. Inside was a custom plush doll wearing a mini police vest with the word Ranger stitched in gold thread. Eli gasped. Tasha wiped away a tear. "You okay with this being his hero story?" she asked quietly. Carter looked around, at the yard full of laughter, at the child alive and glowing, at the dog calmly chewing grass like none of it mattered. "Yeah," he said, "this story belongs to him now." That night, Carter sat on his porch as Ranger rested beside him. The street was quiet, the sky dotted with stars. He held a glass of iced tea and let out a long breath. "You know, people keep saying you saved that boy." Ranger blinked. "And they're right. But you saved me too. Gave me back something I didn't know I'd lost." The dog rolled over and grunted, unimpressed by human emotions. Carter laughed. The next morning, a package arrived at the station. Inside was a hand-painted sign, likely made by a local artist. It read, "A bark in time saves a life. In honor of Ranger, Portland's silent guardian." Carter hung it above his desk. "Thank you for following this powerful and emotional journey. If this story moved you, made you think twice, or reminded you of the bond between humans and animals, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed a moment when an animal's instincts changed everything? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Heroes for Animals, where we tell the real stories of courage, loyalty, and the silent heroes who walk among us on four legs.